Okay, so we carry on day 5. Which is why, half an hour later, Harrison found himself pushing Lana's toy ambulance up the gravel path to Shelley's grandmother's purple front door, with Lana at the steering wheel and his black hole tied to the roof. I don't know if you've ever tried pushing a toy ambulance up a gravel path, but if you have, you'll know it's very noisy. In Harrison's case, it was so noisy that he completely failed to hear the extraordinary sound that was coming from inside the cottage until he was right outside the front door. He pushed open the letterbox and peered through. Inside, every clock was ringing. Digital clocks, wind-up clocks, pendulum clocks, bedside clocks, carriage clocks, cuckoo clocks, alarm clocks, grandfather's clocks, and maritime clocks, each of them straining to make their own voice heard. It was deafening. And there, at the other end of the hall, was Shelley's grandmother, shuffling slowly back and forth, muttering to herself. "Hello," called Harrison. "Hello," called Lana in reply. "I'm talking to Shelley's grandmother," explained Harrison. "I'm hungry," replied Lana. "I want a biscuit." Harrison pushed his right arm through the letterbox and waved. Shelley's grandmother. "It's me, Harrison," he shouted. But it was no use. The clocks were ringing so loudly there was nowhere the old lady could hear him. Harrison felt something prickling the inside of his elbow. It seemed to be a piece of string with one end attached to the inside of the door. The other end felt very loose. He gave it a pull, and out it came, with a door key attached to the end of it. For a moment, Harrison hesitated. He didn't want to give Shelley's grandmother a fright by breaking into a house. Then he remembered that if he didn't get his parents out of the black hole, he and Lana might never see them again, and he decided it was worth the risk. So he untied his black hole from the roof of the ambulance and slotted the key into the lock on the front door. It fitted perfectly, and the next thing he knew, he and Lana were standing in the hallway. He needn't have worried about scaring Shelley's grandmother. She was so deep in thought that she behaved as if she was having two small children sneak into a house uninvited was the most natural thing in the world. Harrison had to stand right in her path, waving both arms before she even acknowledged his presence. "I need to find Shelley," he called, trying to make himself heard over the din of the clocks. "What?" replied Shelley's grandmother, cupping her hand to the ear. "I can't hear you." "I said," began Harrison, and then paused. The alarm nearest him, the old-fashioned bedside clock with two bells, suddenly stopped ringing. Then the mechanical cuckoo in the clock above him closed its beak, fell silent, and sprang back behind closed doors. Then, in twos and threes, the dozens and scores, all the other clocks fell silent too, until the only sound remaining was the bleep of Shelley's grandmother's digital watch. For a moment, they all stood staring at it, until Harrison stepped forwards and switched it off. "Thank you," said Shelley's grandmother. "I've never been able to work that thing." "I need to find Shelley," exclaimed Harrison one more time. But Shelley's grandmother put her finger to her lips, signalling for him to be silent. Excuse me. Out of the question, she said. "I want a biscuit," said Lana, "a pink wafer." "Have you any idea," asked Shelley's grandmother, shaking her head in disbelief, "what happened here?" "No," said Harrison, because he didn't. "It's time," announced Shelley's grandmother, "for my appointment with Destiny." She pushed on the green door, and about 10 minutes later, after a considerable amount of huffing and puffing and having a little break to catch her breath, they found themselves in her laboratory. Only this time, instead of a pulsing white light, at the centre of the machine was an enormous black disc. "You made a black hole," exclaimed Harrison. "Three, actually," said Shelley's grandmother, puffing herself up with pride. "I made the first just before breakfast. Unfortunately, it wasn't stable. After breakfast, I made a second, but it wasn't big enough for me to climb into. Then I made this. Then I had to stop because of my crossing duty, which, by the way, I noticed you two weren't there for." "Sorry about that," said Harrison. "Not a problem," said Shelley's grandmother. "It's a busy time. The point is, I've made a black hole, and now I need to turn it into an Einstein-Rosen bridge. Only I've got no idea how." But where are you going?" asked Harrison. "The future," cried the old lady, "to a time when anyone can do anything, and that includes young girls who want to be astronomers." "But you can't leave. I need you to help me get my parents back," said Harrison. "I got really cross and then spun around like this." He demonstrated with his black hole, being careful not to touch Lana or Shelley's grandmother. He didn't need anyone else falling in. And then they got sucked inside. "I'll have to get them out." "Chocolate finger," cried Lana. Impossible, said Shelley's grandmother. Please, begged Harrison. Or an Oreo, said Lana, with even more feeling. Shelley's grandmother turned to an enormous blackboard that was covered in complicated-looking maths. I don't have time to help you. I've only got 7 minutes left, and I haven't figured out how to turn this into an Einstein-Rosen bridge. She rubbed her chin furiously, as if she was trying to figure out the answer to a very difficult problem. And her eye caught a biscuit tin, which was standing amongst the tea things on a workbench. Here's a Garibaldi, she said to Lana. But what am I supposed to do? Yelled Harrison. Wait, exclaimed Shelley's grandmother. Did you say you spun around? What? Asked Harrison. When your parents fell into the hole, you said you were spinning. Harrison nodded. Of course, Harrison nodded. Of course, exclaimed Shelley's grandmother with a triumphant look in her eye. That's it. The black hole should be spinning. She scribbled some elaborate maths on the board. Yes, she said, a spinning black hole forms an Einstein-Rosen bridge. She checked one of her 3 watches. There's still time, she said to Harrison. Quick, I need you to pedal as fast as you can. No, said Harrison, you have to help me. He couldn't possibly rescue his parents or Blue or even Hector Broom unless he found Shelley, but the old lady wasn't listening to him. What was wrong with all these grown-ups? His heart began to race as anger boiled up inside. He wanted so badly to kick and yell and tell Shelley's grandmother exactly what he thought of her, but he didn't. Instead, he took a deep breath, and another deep breath, and another. And then, in the calmest voice he could muster, he said, Not until you tell me where Shelley is. I am really scared that without her, I'll never see my parents again. Fine, said Shelley's grandmother with a roll of her eyes, and handed Harrison a postcard. On it was a picture of a telescope perched high on a mountain. Shelley's here. Harrison took a postcard with a sigh of relief. It had worked. Being calm and asking simply for help, rather than yelling and screaming, meant that he now knew where to find Shelley. Now, please can we do this? I'm running out of time, Shelley's grandmother said with a tut. Without so much as another word, she took Harrison's black hole and tied it safely out of Lana's reach, then hoisted him onto the seat of the bicycle. Harrison could only just touch the pedals, but by standing up off the seat and leaning all his weight forward, he managed to get them moving. A giant pulley began to turn, and the whole machine revolved like a colossal version of Shelley's grandmother's black hole. Faster, yelled Shelley's grandmother, pointing at the dial. Faster! Harrison pedalled as fast as he could. Good, said Shelley's grandmother. Now keep it steady while I check something. She scribbled a few more calculations on the board. Right, I need to hit that thing at 42 miles an hour. Wish me luck. Harrison was expecting her to run and jump into the black hole, but he'd forgotten, of course, that the old lady didn't move with that much speed. Instead, he watched as she clambered slowly onto a mobility scooter and released the brake. The next few moments were a bit boring, as nothing much happened. Harrison kept on pedalling. Lana nibbled on a biscuit, and Shelley's grandmother trundled slowly towards her spinning black hole. Harrison was just beginning to wonder how much longer he would keep up the pace with his pedalling when the front tire of the mobility scooter touched the edge of the black hole and the old lady shot into the void with uncharacteristic speed, until all Harrison could see was the rear tires, frozen in time. Soon, even they had faded from view, and Shelley's grandmother was gone. I don't like Garibaldi, said Lana, and threw her half-eaten biscuit into the middle of the black hole. Harrison stopped pedalling. What was he going to do now? For a few moments after Shelley's grandmother disappeared, Harrison felt very lost and alone. His parents had vanished into his black hole, and now the only grown-ups other than Shelley who could have helped him was gone too. As he climbed down from the bicycle seat, his eyes began to tingle with tears for the second day that time. Gone, said Lana, pointing at the giant black hole. Yes, Harrison replied. Lana looked worried. Don't worry, Lana, he said, with more confidence than he felt. It's all going to be all right. He looked down at the postcard Shelley's grandmother had given him. He turned it over and read what was on the back. Dear Shelley, don't forget your appointment with Destiny. 9:09 a.m., 9th of September 2019, yours, Shelley. Addressed to the Crooked House, Hillcott, near Sheepston, UK. He frowned. Why was it from Shelley to Shelley? Did Shelley and her grandmother have the same name? That was odd. Harrison turned the postcard over again so that he could look at the picture. In very small writing in one corner it said, Very Large Telescope, Mount Paranal, Chile. Harrison took a deep breath. He was 8 years old. How was he ever going to get to Chile? And who would look after Lana while he was gone? It was impossible, which was when he remembered the one person who could help him. When Harrison opened the front door of the cottage the following morning, he hardly recognised the teenager standing on the step. He was wearing mirror shades and a faded green army jacket, and his hair was gelled in a quiff. Greetings, H, the boy said. Came as soon as I could. Sonny! Harrison rushed forward and gave his big brother a hug. In fact, Sonny was actually Harrison's half-brother because they had the same father, though Sonny lived with his mother in London. Harrison had phoned Sonny last night and told him everything that had happened. Sonny might not be a grown-up, but now that his brother was here, Harrison was sure he could help him fix everything. Where's Lana? Asked Sonny, removing his shades. At school, said Harrison proudly. I gave her breakfast too. That's really impressive, said Sonny, following his brother through to the kitchen. Wait, what happened here? The entire kitchen was empty. All that was left was the black hole tied to the back of the last remaining chair. The table, the pots, the pans, the crockery, the cutlery, the coffee maker, the fridge, all of them gone. I had to keep feeding it, explained Harrison, or it will shrink to nothing. I see, said Sonny gravely. And that's where your dad and mum are? He asked, waving his hand near the black hole surface to see if he could see any reflection. It was an accident, said Harrison, and I would say sorry, except I can't because they're in there and I'm out here. That's why I have to keep throwing things in, because I don't know what will happen if it vanishes completely. Said Sonny. You said on the phone that you need to go to Chile to find this Shelley person. But how are you going to get the black hole on the plane? You can't check it in. The plane would disappear. Guess you'll have to take it as hand luggage. A plane? Asked Harrison. How else are you going to get to Chile? Replied Sonny. But do they let children fly on their own? Asked Harrison. Never, said Sonny. But they let teenagers. Where are you travelling to, sir? Asked the lady at the check-in, glancing up at the tall, raincoat-wearing gentleman in mirror shades. Santiago, said Harrison. He had the string of his black hole in his left hand, so with his right hand, he reached into his inside pocket and handed over Sonny's passport. Because the sleeves on his father's raincoat were much too long, he bunched them up under his armpit so no one would notice. The lady tapped away at her keyboard, then frowned at the screen. And how old are you? She asked. 13, replied Harrison, not daring to catch her eye. My parents gave me this letter, he said, handing over an envelope. Of course, his parents had done nothing of the sort. Sonny had written it on the computer and forged his father's signature. The lady frowned, then tapped on the keyboard again and frowned some more. She picked up Sonny's passport and studied it very carefully. She looked up at Harrison. Would you mind taking your sunglasses off? She said. Of course, said Harrison, hoping she would fall for his disguise. He and Sonny looked alike, but not that alike. That morning, on their way to the train station, they had asked the taxi to stop off at the hairdresser called Hairs R Us. My little brother really wants to look like me, Sonny had said to Carl, with a K, the man in charge, pretending to be embarrassed. I'm not that little, said Harrison. So we're going to give you a quiff then, are we? Asked Carl. And I want it to be brown too, said Harrison, whose hair was blonde. He caught Sonny's eyes and his brother winked. Really? Asked Carl. Do your parents know about this? Yeah, they said. It was totally fine, said Sonny, in his most teenage of teenage voices. They've given us cash, he said, flashing a couple of £20 notes. In that case, said Carl, you can have it purple with pink spots. Now, as he stood at the check-in desk, Harrison just hoped that the haircut and dye would be enough to convince the lady that he was his older brother. The lady continued to stare at the screen, and then, do you have any baggage to check in? She said. Harrison blinked. Did this mean she was going to let him on the plane? No, he said. Any hand luggage? Harrison looked at the black hole. Just this, he said. There was a long pause while the lady studied something on a screen. You'll be boarding from gate C52, she said, and handed Harrison the passport. Inside it was a freshly printed boarding pass. Have a good flight. Harrison thanked her, put his sunglasses back on, turned and walked straight into one of the shiny metal posts that told you where to queue. The problem, of course, was that he was sitting on Sonny's shoulders, and Sonny couldn't see properly where he was going. Sorry, everyone, said Harrison to the annoyed-looking people in the queue. Careful, he hissed down at his brother. We don't want to get caught out. Come on, let's find the loo and get out of this coat. He spotted a woman pushing an elderly gentleman in a special airport wheelchair. She was wearing a badge that said, Chris Difford, Special Assistant. Excuse me, he said to her, where's the loo? That way, the woman said, pointing down a busy corridor to their left. Thank you, said Harrison, and they began to head slowly away, trying their best not to bash into anything else. As soon as they were safely inside the cubicle in the loo with the door locked, Harrison tied his black hole to the loo seat and began to unbutton the raincoat. When he got to the third button, Sonny's hair appeared. And by the time he reached the fifth, he could see his brother's red and sweaty face. We made it, hissed Harrison in great excitement. I've got my boarding pass. Look, now I can get on the plane. Not quite, replied Sonny. We need to get you and your black hole through the security scanner first, and I'm not sure how it's going to cope with that. What if they want to take it from you to examine it? Harrison's heart began to race. If the scanner people took his black hole, he'd never get his parents back. He suddenly felt very scared indeed, and because he was scared, he started to have a meltdown. I don't want to go on a plane, he blurted. Shh, whispered Sonny. Someone will hear. It's a stupid idea. You can't make me, yelled Harrison. His legs wobbled and his arms flailed as if they had minds of their own. Get a grip, said Sonny, clamping his hand over Harrison's mouth. If you pull a code red, we're finished. A code red. Now Sonny was using that horrible phrase his parents did. Oh! But suddenly, Harrison had a revolutionary thought. What if he didn't lose his temper? Just like with Shelley's grandmother back at the lab, when he'd managed to make her listen to him. What if, instead of kicking off, he imagined putting his problem in the black hole and making it disappear? What if he just told Sonny that he was worried, not angry? And just for a moment, he relaxed. What's the matter? Asked Sonny. Are you all right? He still had his hand over Harrison's mouth. Harrison tried to speak, but it came out muffled. Sorry, whispered Sonny, and released his hand. I'm scared, said Harrison in a small voice. That's okay, said Sonny with a smile. So am I. We're not going to let this thing beat us. We're going to think, and we're going to come up with a plan. There was a pause while the two of them did just that. Harrison considered various options, including squirting all the security people with a water pistol so they ran away, or setting off the fire alarm like Hector Broom had once done at school. Unfortunately, he didn't have a water pistol, and he had no idea if airports had fire alarms. He was just considering a third option that he liked to call giving up when his eye caught a notice on the door in front of them. It said that the toilet they were in was accessible and showed a little stick man sign of a disabled person. What if I'm in a wheelchair? Harrison asked, like the old man we just saw. What would they do at security then? I think they'd wave you straight through, said Sonny. But you're not in a wheelchair, so that's no good. What if I pretended? Whispered Harrison, a note of excitement in his voice. I look really tall sitting on your shoulders. What if I say I've had a growth spurt and it's given me some bad growing pains? Harrison, said Sonny, with the air of someone breaking bad news, impersonating a disabled person is wrong, and no one, I repeat, no one is going to give you a special assistance because you've got growing pains. Bring him straight through, Chris. The security guard was beckoning, so Chris Difford, from Special Assistant, pushed Harrison Sonny's wheelchair through a tall grey rectangular arch, which Harrison guessed must be some sort of metal detector. It was like being invisible. No one searched him, and no one questioned the fact that he was holding what looked like large black party balloon on a piece of string. That wasn't even the best bit. Once they were through security, Chris helped Harrison onto a special yellow and silver mini truck and drove through the airport like a maniac all the way to the boarding gate. Then she helped Harrison Sonny back into the wheelchair and pushed him down a long winding corridor right to the door of the plane. "Here you go, my friend," said Chris, parking the wheelchair and ratcheting the brake with her foot. "End of the line." "Thanks," said Harrison. There was a porthole in the wall, and he could just see a huge jet engine spinning on the wing of the plane. There were two flight attendants waiting inside, a man and a woman. They both smiled brightly. "Look after this one, please," Chris told them. "Teenager, growing pains." "Right," said the lady flight attendant, slightly mystified. "Welcome on board, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Harrison handed it over and she studied it carefully, as if she was looking for some sort of mistake. Then she smiled. "You're at the back," she said. "Row 26. As soon as Harrison reached his seat, Sonny started poking him in the ribs. Harrison checked to see if the flight attendants were looking, then undid the top few buttons of his coat. "Unbelievable," said Sonny, peeping through the gap. "We made it." "What do we do now?" asked Harrison. It felt very strange talking to his chest. "Somehow, I need to get off this plane," Sonny replied. "I've got to get back so I can look after Lana when school's finished. Otherwise, she'll be on her own. Or worse, someone will find out that Dad and your mum are gone." The first few passengers were making their way down the plane towards them, so they needed to move fast, making sure his black hole was securely tied to the armrest of the seat next to him. Harrison unbuttoned his coat and carefully climbed off his brother's shoulders. Sonny was now looking very red in the face and his quiff was squashed. "Right, little brother," he said, standing up and putting his hand on Harrison's shoulder. "You're on your own from now. Good luck." And then he was gone.